Hey, what is up, everybody? Welcome to the Guilty as Charged podcast. My name is Steven, and I am the host, as always, coming to you live with a new computer. I don't know if you can tell or not, but my previous laptop I had since 2015, and it finally was dying out on me. So I had to get a new one, got one for Christmas, and excited to be recording on it today. Joining me is my guy, Tyler. Tyler, what's up, man? How you doing today?
Same Tyler, same computer, but we're still here, still going strong. I'm doing great, man. Excited to do these elevator pitches for these GM candidates. We sort of discussed them a bit in our Big Four rankings. We discussed them a bit more on our Chargers episode that just dropped today, like an hour ago.
Yeah.
So if you'd like to go listen to Tej talk about some candidates and those qualities, etc. That conversation really helped shape what I'm going to talk about today, what we're going to talk about today, some of the qualities that I was looking for that helped me prioritize and rank these GMs. So go listen to that. But if you're here, stay here, hit like, comment, then go over there, like and comment, and then you can come back here and leave another comment. Thanks.
Yeah, we got Daniel in here. He said that he was late. He was watching the other video on the Chargers channel. So we appreciate you guys obviously watching the Chargers channel. I have to give a big shout out to Tej Seth, who has been one of the best analytical people to follow on social media. Had a great time picking his brain about the Chargers general manager search. And like Tyler said, I think it helped me kind of narrow things down a little bit. I mean, like the two of us do a ton of research about these kind of things. And you know, we have prepared several shows for you guys watching, to watch about the Chargers GM search. But at the end of the day, like, you know, somebody like him who has experience working with an NFL team, like it's just kind of different. You know, he's not like in the front office by any means, but he's been in an NFL building and he kind of knows what it's like over there. So, you know, it helps kind of narrow the focus a bit for sure. Some candidates maybe you think more of or less of after talking to somebody like that. And I think that's certainly happened for myself after talking with him.
Absolutely. I can't wait to get into it. I won't say anything, won't spoil anything. But it's exciting.
Yeah, 100%. Again, not a ton of stuff to touch on in terms of the Chargers' upcoming game. Russell Wilson is going to be benched. I don't know how much we want to dive into that. But I will say after the Chargers traded for Khalil Mack and the Broncos traded for Russell Wilson, I sent out a tweet that Khalil Mack moved the needle more, and I'm here to take my victory lap once again that I was right about Russell Wilson. Will be very interesting to see Easton Stick versus Jarrett Stidham on Sunday afternoon as the Broncos, which is, it's just kind of weird to me that they're doing this because they're still technically in the race. They could still theoretically make the playoffs. But it is what it is, man. Russ has like $40 million of injury guarantees if he's on the roster in March. And that's obviously the reason why they are doing this decision.
Yeah, lovely. And now Russell Wilson is hitting likes on all the tweets about fantasy things and Patrick Mahomes versus Wilson stats. It's a whole thing, but Easton Stick would never.
No, he would never. So we'll have some other things to cover at some point about this game. But really, I'm not sure how much you guys are caring about Easton Stick versus Jarrett Stidham when we have a head coach and GM search to partake in. So like Tyler said, we're going to do something different about this episode. We did this when the Chargers were hiring Brandon Staley. We did kind of a crossover episode where we got to kind of interview the opposing podcasters, if you will, and they took the place and we took the place of a head coaching candidate. So we're going to do the same kind of thing in terms of an elevator pitch for these GM candidates, and then we're going to rank these GM candidates. So we're going to discuss 10 different names today in a variety of different ways. Hopefully you guys enjoy this format, and I'm excited to dive in with Tyler today.
Let's do it. Chargers GM search.
Nice. All right. So first and foremost, we'll do the elevator pitch for each candidate. We split it up 5 and 5 between Tyler and myself. We'll do the elevator pitch, and then the other one will kind of have some thoughts there. The names that we have decided on as the top 10, we'll reveal each of our orders later on, but these are the 10 names that I think are the names that we feel most comfortable with. Obviously, see Ian Cunningham of the Bears, Browns Tillis of the Chiefs, Katherine Rush of the Browns. My dad speaks French, so shout out to Papa Haglin for teaching me how to say that name correctly. She's from Montreal, Canada. Mr. Ed Dodds from the Colts, Trey Brown from the Bengals, Alec Halaby of the Eagles, Will McClay of the Cowboys, Adam Peters of the 49ers, Jamal Agnew of the Lions, and Joe Hortiz of the Baltimore Ravens. So those are the 10 that we will be discussing and ranking today.
Absolutely. And starting it off is Ray Agnew, the assistant GM of the Detroit Lions. So like a 2-minute pitch for all these. There's no order to these yet. It's just the 10, and we'll alternate here. So here we go. So yeah, Ray Agnew, assistant GM for the Lions. He's had 2 experiences with 2 very different approaches to the draft, but both of those teams have found approaches that work for them and made them successful teams. So he's part of the Rams staff, of course, that said F them picks, and they became contenders. But then he switches to the Lions for a promotion and does a whole 180 in philosophy where they're trying to acquire picks, and they took the quarterback that everyone, wrote off, and now they've won the division for the first time in 30 years. And what I think is really impressive, and sure, with all these GM candidates, there's an aspect of we're not entirely sure how much they specifically did the thing for the team. But it's worth noting that he did join the Rams in 2017 when McVay is hired. He joined the Lions in 2021 when Campbell was hired. And so he's helped be a part of organizations that took first-time head coaches who are very, very different and made both of them successful, which is what the Chargers have struggled with. And the Lions, since they added him, their draft hits in the draft are frequent. Penei Sewell, Aleem McNeil, Amon-Ra St. Brown, Derek Barnes, Aiden Hutchinson, Kirby Joseph, Malcolm Rodriguez, Jahmyr Gibbs, Sam Laporta, Brian Branch, et cetera, et cetera. There's an eye for talent from day 1 to day 2 to day 3 that many in the NFL don't have. And you look right when he joined the Lions, they were drafting beautifully. And those past 3 drafts are why the Lions are in the postseason right now. So, most of these candidates do come from great organizations, but no one on this list can say they were part of turning around the Detroit Lions, which I think makes him a very, very enticing candidate.
Yeah, and I think you can highlight a few different things that we are going to be kind of common consensus for these candidates. Tyler, what do you make of his Tej's comment and how it applies to Ray Agnew in terms of the diversity of role? Because he was mostly a scout and then assistant GM with the Lions. Is there any concern for you in terms of him not having that kind of diverse background in his job status?
Not necessarily, no. And we'll find out where he is in my rankings. The short answer to that is no. I'm not particularly concerned there. Having worked with 2 separate teams and had different roles, I think that's only boosts his resume.
All right, sounds good. We'll get into the next elevator pitch here, which will be my turn. Adam Peters, arguably the hottest name among Chargers fandom. I think the way to start with Adam Peters is there was a poll from The Athletic where they reached out to, I think it was 25 different agents. And even though he's not the actual GM, Adam Peters' name was brought up several times by different agents as the most trustworthy talent evaluator. He is widely respected for his ability to find talent throughout any nook and cranny of the draft, whether it's the first round or the later rounds. He is the one that John Lynch has really relied upon in terms of the draft. He's essentially the lead voice in the draft room for the San Francisco 49ers. And obviously you can point to the Trey Lance debacle, but look how they have made that up. You're talking about several different players in different points of the draft contributing. Spencer Burford, a 4th-round pick, has become a quality guard for them. Obviously, Brock Purdy in the 7th round. You have Aaron Banks in the 2nd round starting for them right now. Ambry Thomas in the 3rd round. Talanoa Hufanga in the 5th round. Elijah Mitchell in the 6th round. Brandon Ayuk, Javon Kinlaw in the 1st round. Colton McKivitz in the 5th round. And I think you can look at, in a microcosm of the Adam Peters era, that 2020 draft, they only made 5 selections, and 4 of those selections are starting caliber players for them. And one of them, Brandon Ayuk, is a star player for them. So the draft is a huge feather in his cap. I think you have that extensive non-first round success, the aggressive culture that he has built in terms of we're going to go out and acquire players regardless of what it takes, whether that's Trey Lance, whether that's Chase Young, whether that's Christian McCaffrey. He has all of that in his background, and I think that is something that all of us as Chargers fans have been really wanting to see from them. The positive and I guess negative here for Adam Peters is that the 49ers are working overtime to keep him. John Lynch has moved to a president of operations role. A lot of people think that is because they want to keep Adam Peters and make him the GM. But I think that shows his value. If the 49ers are working that hard to keep him, he obviously is doing something right in San Francisco.
A lot of these candidates, the top 10 that we made, I just love how they problem solve. And you don't have to always be right. You're not going to be always right. We talked to Tom Telesco, and he said, look, if I can get 50-50 or whatever it was, I'm feeling great. But that's basically impossible. And sure, maybe the 49ers are 50-50, but they also find ways to problem solve, even if things don't go well. The fact that we're considering Adam Peters at all, given what the 49ers did to go get Trey Lance and how that has basically been one of the worst trade-up decisions ever in terms of draft capital given up and what they got in return. The fact that we're still talking about him and the fact that fans are still interested in Adam Peters as arguably their number one candidate is so impressive, because that just speaks to everything else this organization with Adam Peters there has been able to do.
Yeah, so I think if he is available, I think he is a guy that will command a lot of attention. I will caution people, if the Chargers decide to hire Jim Harbaugh or Bill Belichick first, you're not getting Adam Peters. This is Adam Peters is the one who would call the shots, whereas Harbaugh and Bill Belichick would probably call the shots. So I know that is a very common thing. Let's get the top GM candidate. Let's get the top coaching candidate. Let's form this power couple. It doesn't work like that. Both of those guys are going to want to call the shots in their own way. So it's either one or the other. It's not both. So just want to throw that out there as Chargers fans are preparing for how this process goes. But I think Adam Peters, his record really speaks for itself.
Yeah, the best candidates can be the most selective, and because they deserve to be the most selective, and therefore, why be somewhere where I'm going to be told what to do, not where I can make the decisions. Granted, sure, there's ownership in other places as well, but that's a story for another time. All right, Katherine, and can you say her last name for me one more time?
Raiche.
Raiche. I'm going with Raiche because Steven's dad said so. So Katherine Rush, the assistant GM and vice president of football operations for the Browns, has slowly become not my number one candidate for a GM, but my favorite one, and someone who I think in a few years could be and could have been the number one candidate on my list. And frankly, if someone had her number one, I totally get it. She gets the attention of Mark Trestman, who wanted to follow, he wanted her to follow him to the XFL when they met from the CFL. 6 months into that job, Howie Roseman notices her and goes, please come work for me, and opens up a spot on his staff for her. And in that staff, or on the Philadelphia Eagles, she meets Andrew Berry, and Andrew Berry goes to the Browns. And then Berry says, hey, I'm going to the Browns. Please join me. I mean, people are asking this woman to join them because of how smart she is and how good of a personnel staffer as she has been, and now assistant GM for the Browns. So having worked with, Howie Roseman and then a Howie Roseman disciple tree for the past 5 years is great. I mean, we're looking for organizations or people from organizations who are some of the best and most forward-thinking. The Chargers said creative, forward-thinking. That's what we're looking for. And she's worked for the Eagles and Howie Roseman and now the Browns and Andrew Berry. And those are two of arguably the 3 or 4 most forward-thinking organizations in the NFL. And another thing we talked about, and Tej, part of what her ascent for me is what we talked about with Tej, where he talked about, okay, how do you address premium positions? How do you solve problems? And the Browns during her tenure have been excellent at addressing premium positions. They haven't had a first or second round pick the past 2 seasons, but 5 of their first 6 picks in the past 2 drafts went to premium positions. Need a receiver? We'll get Elijah Moore. Need an edge rusher? Let's go get Zadarius Smith. They continue to commit to premium positions. And as Tej talked about, the 100 points question, how do you allocate the number of points to different positions? It would seem like, based on the Browns' history, that Raiche would allocate those resources towards those premium positions that has eluded the Chargers for many drafts now, really until this past one. And the Browns also problem solved really well. The quarterback, which she inherited, she was not there before Deshaun Watson was added. That has not worked out at all for various reasons. Okay, here's Joe Flacco with a complete career resurrection. I mean, the Browns are going to be in the postseason and kicking ass because of the Joe Flacco situation. Defense not living up to your standards, no problem. Let's pivot. She used her connection, was in a part of the interview to go get Jim Schwartz, because Jim Schwartz was there with the Eagles. She was a big part in Schwartz coming over to the Browns, and now the Browns have the best defense in the NFL. Just problem solving every chance she gets. So to me, there isn't a GM candidate with a better year-to-year resume than Resch. The only question really is just years in the NFL. But as we've seen, honestly, from Tom Telesco, it's not like that matters. Like, to me, you either have it or you don't. And Resch, to me, absolutely has it.
Yeah, I think you look at her resume and the diversity of experience really stands out. I mean, she was very instrumental in the organization of the XFL, and like you mentioned, all of the experience with Howie Roseman. And there's a lot of Howie Roseman ties in this slideshow. It's certainly a group of individuals that have really benefited from being around him, as well as Ozzie Newsome is featured in the slideshow quite a bit. Um, but one of the things I think we can all agree on is a priority for whoever the GM is the ability to work under the future, cap constraints of having an expensive quarterback. And what better way to show off a resume than say, hey, you want to see the worst trade in franchise history and see how somebody can bounce back from that? That's what Katherine Raiche has done over her time. Obviously, she's not the GM, but she played a large role, like Tyler laid out, in helping the Browns, bounce back from that Deshaun Watson fiasco. Like Tyler mentioned, she's used to the media frenzy and everything that comes with that. So she was not somebody on my radar really until talking with Tej. I think Tej is really the way that he kind of outlined the necessity of diversity of experience and backgrounds and teams really, enlightened me on the importance of Katherine Rush and her resume.
Absolutely.
All right, so Joe Hortiz is next for here. He's been the player personnel director for quite some time in Baltimore. He's got an extensive background in successful veteran acquisitions. He can go to the Chargers and say, hey, you guys signed Kyle Van Noy and it didn't work out that great. I signed Kyle Van Noy and it worked out great. You talk about the Jadeveon Clowney renaissance. You talk about all the corners, all the safeties, Marcus Williams. You talk about their work that they've done with Roquan Smith, a lot of these guys on defense, and Sammy Watkins on offense, and all of these players that they have brought in on the fly. Joe Hortiz has had a lot of background in doing the homework and the legwork of getting those veterans to buy into the Baltimore culture and obviously bring them to Baltimore. You talk about a need that the Chargers have is increasing the amount of flexibility and adaptability. And the roster in Baltimore has been the definition of that, whether it is the Orlando Brown trade, whether it is trading down in the draft, whether it is compensatory picks, which we've talked about a few times. The Ravens have been kind of the kings of all of that in recent years, and Joe Hortiz has been in Baltimore for a really long time. I think his track record is a little bit more limited than some of these other guys. I don't know with 100% certainty if it would be Hortiz or Ed Dodds, who will be featured here in a minute. That would be the GM of choice for Jim Harbaugh, but I do think that is an advantage for Joe Hortiz. Maybe Ed Dodds, who's been selective in the past, might decide to stay in Indianapolis, and Joe Hortiz has had that track record of working with a Harbaugh, has that track record of knowing what exactly the personnel and play style that the Harbaughs are looking for. Not that he's worked with Jim extensively, but Jim and John are essentially the same football coach. And so I think there is something to be said that Joe could really work well with Jim Harbaugh and build out this Ravens West, Michigan West out here with the Los Angeles Chargers.
How did you weigh? I guess we'll find out in the rankings, but how did you weigh? I think everyone we've talked about so far is an assistant GM, and a lot of these guys are assistant GMs. How did you weigh him being, quote unquote, only the director of player personnel through this point? I know he had previous experience, but there's an operations side of things that he hasn't really in name had a hand in.
Yeah, so he's done scouting and he's done player personnel. So he's done both of those things. So I do think that has mattered. He's obviously learned from Ozzie Newsome and Eric DaCosta. His background, I think, works well for his candidacy. But I think there is something to be said about, these guys who, or girls as well, who have kind of bounced around and figured things out and had chances to shine on their own in not ideal circumstances. I mean, Joe has been in Baltimore for a very long time. He has come up under that system. He's had the perfect mentors. There's not a ton of pressure on him. So I do think for those reasons, like, he's not going to be super high on my list, but I do think there is something to be said about the idea of marrying culture and identity from a GM and a head coaching standpoint. And if you want somebody who is all about like physicality and aggressiveness in terms of a coach, I think it does help to have somebody like Joe who could come in and say, hey, like I've been around that kind of physicality and aggressive nature all my life, basically in Baltimore. So I do think that there's some calling cards to be had for him, but I think his resume falls a little short in terms of some of the other candidates as well.
Yeah, I would agree. He was higher up for me, but given the discussion with Tej and the experience we were looking for, he's not a bank candidate by any means. He just won't crack like my top 4 or whatever it was,
Yeah.
which we'll get into in a bit. Alrighty, so I have Alec Halaby next. I'm sorry, I don't if I didn't pronounce that correct, but it seems close enough to me. The assistant general manager for the Eagles. Well, if you want the best, you got to pull from the best, and the Eagles are probably the best organization front office wise in the NFL, and they play the draft game better than anybody else, and they get whoever they want, and they might acquire picks along the way. And the Eagles are also one of the premium trench teams in the league. I think the 49ers are probably the only other team that you can say that they're that good for that many years. If you can hear my dog, she wants to go outside. As soon as I'm done with this pitch, I'm going to let her outside. But it's really impressive. I think one of the more impressive things is that the Eagles can throw it out and start over if they need to. And if it's a retool, a rebuild, whatever, they're able to do it. And it's worth pointing out that Halaby has been with the Eagles since 2007, where over the course of 16 seasons, he's seen the transition from McNabb to Vic to Wentz to Hurts. I mean, the Eagles have been paying quarterbacks, and they still find ways to win with all of them. And then just recently, you had Carson Wentz, but you win the Super Bowl with Foles. You tear that down, you retool it, you get a new coach, you get a new quarterback, and you go to the Super Bowl last year. So I just think it's an impressive resume from someone who is the right-hand guy for Howie Roseman. I mean, they but they spent 16 years together in Philadelphia, getting promoted together in lockstep. And so I think that if you're looking for the next Howie Roseman disciple, why not his right-hand man? And I think it's worth pointing out that there are guys who go to other teams, some that we have talked about, some that we will talk about, Andrew Berry, Ian Cunningham, etc. These guys have been working with Howie Roseman and been successful with other teams. So that just gives you a bit more of a boost in terms of his outlook.
Yeah, I think before you jump out, Tyler, I just want to expand a little bit about Halaby. I think, similar to Joe Hortiz, he's been in Philadelphia for a long time, but the different thing here is that Halaby has had like 5 different roles with the Eagles. He has that operations side of things. He has the personal assistant side of things, working with Howie Roseman. Now he's the assistant GM and has a very large hand in the midseason acquisitions that they have made. He apparently was crucial in bringing Shaq Leonard over and crucial in bringing James Bradbury over. So this is a guy that I think makes up for the lack of like places with the amount of different roles that he's had. Like he's ready for everything. And I think the GM role is really simplified by the fans in terms of, draft picks and roster, right? But there's so many more things to go into. And I think Alec Halaby's experience really lends itself to becoming that kind of diverse, forward-thinking GM that the Chargers supposedly are looking for.
Yeah, some front offices are different than others, of course, but this one, even if he's been only with one team, like you said, the amount of roles that he's had and what they ask, I think what the Eagles ask of their departments is just a bit different. They're always the most forward-thinking. They're always doing the most creative things. So if it's a hand in analytics, it's that. If it's cap, it's that. If it's draft strategy, it's that. Not that these other assistant GMs don't do that, but I think the Eagles prepare their candidates better than anybody else. And now I'm going to go let my dog out.
All right. Sounds good. While Tyler lets his dog out, real quick, I'm going to tell you guys about Mr. Ian Cunningham, the assistant GM of the Chicago Bears. Obviously, we've talked a lot about roots in this show. That was fast from Tyler. Talked a lot about roots. And so you look at his roots, he's come up under Ozzie Newsome and Howie Roseman. Ozzie basically handpicked him to continue to work, or to start his career under Ozzie. They had a great relationship where Ian would pick his brain from time to time and really just be a sponge. And I think that has really influenced him. Ozzie Newsome's kind of the godfather of the GM world right now. And I think that experience working under Ozzie and Howie, who are very different in their approaches. Ozzie was very much like draft and develop. Howie's kind of just like aggressive. Let's do anything possible. Let's throw all the resources at these problems. And so that diverse background, I think, helps out. He does a lot of work, obviously, with the Chicago Bears, heads up a lot of their draft work as well. over the past 2 years. He even lived with Ryan Poles while their families were like getting accustomed to things. And so I think that really shows like this man is willing to do anything it takes to run the best operation as possible. The experience of building from the ground up in Chicago, I think, is really something that the Chargers can lean on. They're not building from the ground up, but because you have Justin Herbert and Rashawn Slater, like there is some foundation here. But like I mentioned, the Bears had such limited resources. Like everything they've done has been with Ian and Ryan Poles. And I think with the Chargers having such a limited poll, I think you could have that same kind of thing. And then he is a former offensive lineman. He spent one training camp in the NFL before figuring out that it wasn't his thing. But he was an All-American offensive guard at the University of Virginia. That is always something I think pays dividends in what the Chargers' problems are, which has been the trenches and that identity of things. And I know things are not like perfect with the Bears, but you look at their draft picks, it wasn't necessarily a super highly graded draft class, but Darnell Wright, Jervon Dexter, Tyreek Stevenson, Tyler Scott, Terrell Smith are all guys who are contributing right now. Last year, Kyler Gordon, Jaquan Brisker are key starters. Braxton Jones in the 5th round has given them above average offensive tackle play. Dominique Robinson is giving them above average defensive end play. Jatiri Carter has been a key player for them. Tevin Jenkins has been a key player for them. So it's not necessarily like an elite track record in Chicago, but I think his background and the experiences that he's brought that he can bring to the table, for me, are good reasons why I feel like he would be a good GM candidate.
Yeah, I'm very curious. Like, I wish we saw one more season, which is the next season that the Bears are going to have, to see what they do with the picks that they have and really trying to either completely start all over or take Fields and crescendo into the best possible roster they can have and see what you can do with that. I would love to see what he's about to do with these picks, but he might obviously get hired, so we'll never know. But the background, I mean, Ozzie Newsome, Howie Roseman, it was like, as Dan said, before Roseman, it was Ozzie, and the Ravens were just the most consistent. They still are. But the Ravens were an outstanding, consistent team. The Eagles have been consistent. He's going to be very high on my rankings, that's for sure.
Yeah, he's somebody I'm really, really, really interested in, and you'll see just how much here in a bit. So, all right, so let's get to the next one here, which is Brandon Tillis.
Yeah, so Brent Tillis, this is your salary cap guru manager sort of guy. He's been in charge of the cap and contract negotiations for the Chiefs since 2015. Wow, 2017. And has been a part of the Chiefs, continuing their dominance well into the Mahomes deal, which he also helped oversee. I think he has, in terms of roles, the most unique background of all these candidates. So football operations intern, labor operations department in the NFL. Then he spent 14 seasons with the Chiefs as a salary cap contract analyst, director of salary cap and football operations analytics, director of football operations, and now VP of football operations. So just somebody who has been a part. The obvious knock there that maybe some of you are hearing is that I don't hear a specific draft side of things and a player personnel side of things. So he's not going to be much higher on my list than some of these other candidates. But I do think he presents something unique, and I do think the connections to Kansas City and what they've been able to do contract-wise during the Mahomes contract has been pretty solid. Rough time this year, right? It's not like the Chiefs have been great, but being able to manage the cap and get someone like Charles Omenihu or a Drew Tranquil and getting contracts like that and maximizing your roster that way, like his job has been outside of specific personnel in the draft to find every way possible to maximize the roster. And I think that it's worth noting. But Brant Tillis isn't exactly the highest on my list, but he is talked about quite a bit as a high candidate.
Yeah, I think, there is a way to obviously mitigate some of the areas that you're looking for in terms of, Brant could theoretically hire like a draft guru assistant GM, and that guy could be in charge essentially of looking at that side of things. Brant, though, is, supposedly like the top salary cap guy in the league in terms of how agents feel about him, how the league feels about him. So, the Chargers and their cap situation has been exaggerated. Diana Rossini put it as cap prison. That's not true objectively. But at the same time, like this is a situation that's pretty unprecedented for the Chargers where they're going to have to wear a lot of dead cap this upcoming season. And so having somebody in charge of things that is like a legit cap guru, I think could help. Ed McGuire has been that guy for the Chargers, but at the same time, he's nearing retirement, and I don't know if he's going to want to stick around for a new GM. So there is definitely a good thing about bringing in a potential like cap expert as a GM. But like you mentioned, I think the lack of true like personnel roles, I think certainly affects his candidacy.
Absolutely.
All right, next one here, Will McClay, very popular candidate as well. He's been the VP player of personnel with the Dallas Cowboys. He is the Cowboys draft point man. Pretty much everything related to the draft runs through Will McClay. And basically, since they made that transition, the Cowboys have had one of the best draft track records in the NFL. I believe that started with the 2020 class where they had CeeDee Lamb and Trayvon Diggs and Tyler Biadasz and Ben DiNucci and all that crowd. Then in 2021, he gets Micah Parsons, Osa Odigozua, Chauncey Golston, Josh Ball, all these guys who have played good football for them. Israel Mukwamu, Simi Fehoko was also in that class. 2022, he has Tyler Smith, Sam Williams, Jalen Tolbert, Jake Ferguson, Deron Bland, Timon Clark, all guys starting, playing high-level football for them. And then this past class is a bit of more of a work in progress. They definitely took more of a longer term side of things to this draft, but Mozzie Smith, Luke Schoonmaker, DeMarvion Overshone from Texas, Viliami Fehoko, Asim Richards, all guys who are, projected to be, key backups in the future. So, his background is a little bit more limited, but, the key thing in turning around this Cowboys roster, I think, has really been that draft track record, and that all starts with Will McClay. He's had a real knack of hitting like home run picks on day 3. I just mentioned a few of them. I think Deron Bland is obviously the key thing there, but Jake Ferguson in the 4th round is like one of the best tight ends in the league right now. You also have Osa Odigozua in the 3rd round, one of the best interior pass rushers. So that track record matters a lot. Tyler Biadasz in the 4th round, a very quality starting center, and I think that's really his thing. It is the draft is his bag. Something that plays really well for me is the environment that he's been in. You're talking about the most involved owner and owner's son situation in the league, and it's not even close. Everything he does is very heavily scrutinized under that Jerry Jones, Stephen Jones microscope. So he has this situation where he's not given a ton of freedom because he is micromanaged, most likely under a very large microscope. So I think that does matter. He can come into his own situation where he could have more freedom and kind of, stretch his wings, so to speak. Also, he's been crucial in the Brandon Cooks trade and the Stephon Gilmore trade, and really making things work on that end. And that draft flexibility, being able to trade draft picks for veterans is something, again, that we've talked about a lot about today. I think his track record there has shown very strong as well. So for me, Will McClay, the draft personnel, the ability to work under a microscope are things that I think really play for him. But like we've talked about, he doesn't have that diverse background of roles like some of these other guys do.
Yeah, and that's definitely going to be part of the same knock I have on someone like Hortiz, especially because he's basically just been with one team. I know he was 1 year with the Jaguars as 1 year. Spent a lot of time with the Cowboys basically for 20-something years, whatever it is. It's tough for me to figure out, how much credit do you give to a lot of these individuals, right? Because they're the assistant general manager. Then how much credit do you give to these assistant general managers or VP players of personnel when there is so much oversight from another, from an owner's son? But as Tej pointed out, okay, if you're curious or wondering how much credit should we give McClay, given how much oversight there is from the owner, just look at what happened when they flipped him to VP of player personnel and how much better those drafts got. So when he kind of became the guy in charge of the draft and scouting and drafting, that's where you can really see his impact. And that's why he's a very enticing candidate for sure.
Yeah. Similar to Adam Peters, there's a lot of doubt that he actually leaves. As Sholoman points out, he has a very high salary. He is very well compensated for his services. And I think rightfully so, given his track record. So he makes a lot more than VP player personnel usually do. And I think that's going to be the decision. Is that real breaking news, Eddie Saldana? They're releasing him.
Well, cool. Like, actually, that's news, or is there? I'm banning editing if it's not actually. I mean, not that I would be surprised if that they did it. Like, that wouldn't surprise me. I'm just curious if it's actually like.
It's not official, but I think there's a ton of skepticism there, and rightfully so, about Russell Wilson staying on the roster. So Broncos most likely having a new quarterback next year.
Yep. Well, come get this 6th overall pick.
Yeah, 100%. Jaden, come if Jaden Daniels is on the board, come get it.
Yeah, I say that now, knowing that. Anyway, all right. Next, let's go to Ed Dodds. So I already saw some Ed Dodds love in the chat, and I totally get it. Dodds kicked off his time in the NFL with the Seattle Seahawks, where he's given a ton of credit for building that Seattle Super Bowl team, the Legion of Boom, etc. And then he joins the Colts, and in my opinion, they've had some of the best like offensive draft picks and development since he joined the team in 2017. Wasn't great before then, but as soon as he gets there in 2017 as the assistant GM, you see everything just starts to take off. So Quentin Nelson, okay, that was an easy one. But you'd roll through the rest of it. Michael Pittman, Jonathan Taylor, Alec Pierce, Jelani Woods, Bernard Ryman, who wasn't really great to start his career. Now he's really developed. It's a great selection there. Josh Downs, Will Mallory. And not a lot of these guys are like beloved prospects. And it wasn't always the easy decision or the obvious one, but they've all really developed. And it really looked like Anthony Richardson was going to be that guy until he got hurt. Like, they really did a great job on the offensive side of things. Unfortunately, Richardson got hurt. So that kind of sucks. But it is also important that the Colts nailed the Shane Steichen hire. And was that the easy hire? I don't know, but you could have gone in many different directions. And Shane Steichen was a first-time, head coach, but they've absolutely nailed that. And I think him being a part of that process and them absolutely crushing that hire, where the Colts are the 7th seed and they have 2 games left, but they could still win the division because they're technically tied with the Jaguars in win-loss record. With Gardner Minshew at quarterback, and to find a coach and to hire the right guy and be a part of that is pretty significant. And I think that Shane Steichen is going to take the Colts to the postseason for many years. So Dodds has just the experience that you really like. He's got the right mentality. We talked about the quotes from him about he doesn't effing care about this or that. He just wants to win. That's all that matters. Really like him overall as a fit with like someone like Jim Harbaugh. Like we talk about, maybe there's a conflicting personality there because they're both kind of not head cases, but very driven, let's say. But I think he would match a cultural shift for the Chargers that they're looking for.
Yeah, so I don't know if we want to touch on it, but Deanna Rossini tweeted out that Russell Wilson is expecting to be cut by the Broncos in March. That's where that was coming from Eddie earlier.
Gotcha.
Getting back to Ed Dodds, though, I think it's very tough sometimes to really know how to parse out credit, like we've talked about earlier. One of the things I think is very clear, though, is Ed Dodds' influence with the draft in Indianapolis. So Chris Ballard was hired in 2017. He hired Ed Dodds after the 2018 draft. So Chris Ballard had 2 drafts before Ed Dodds came over as the assistant GM. And he's had the 2019, 2020, 2021, 2022, 23 draft classes with Ed Dodds. Since that point, since hiring Ed Dodds, the Colts have had an average RES above 8 in every single draft class. And before that, it was around 7. So you're talking about 5 very elite, high-end athleticism draft classes. And obviously that doesn't mean automatically equate to better football teams. It doesn't equate to having a better product, but it is something that we have talked about, that the Chargers need to get younger, faster, more athletic. And if you look at the over that time frame of 2019 to 2023, the draft classes, I went on the RES website, and you look at the top 40 most athletic draft classes, all of Ed Dodds' classes in Indianapolis are in that top 40 range. The man absolutely has had a very large influence in getting the Colts turned around, because they had a pretty similar reputation before Ed Dodds got there of being slower, of being older, needing to get younger and more athletic. And Ed Dodds, I think, has been the most crucial piece of that puzzle to get the Colts back on track. And then, like you mentioned, the day 3 selections here are fantastic. The culture that he could bring to the table is fantastic as well. So I'm a big fan of Ed Dodds. Spoiler alert. But I think his track record, the emphasis on athleticism, the emphasis on that aggressive mentality, I think really pays dividends for what the Chargers are specifically lacking right now.
Yeah, I agree. Even just the background experience, it feels so unique. We're talking about Roseman Tree, Newsom Tree, or the Ravens or whatever. Specifically going from, the Seahawks to the Colts and finding success there just makes him stand out a bit more.
Yeah, 100%. 100%. All right. Next one here is Mr. Trey Brown. He's a senior director of player personnel for the Cincinnati Bengals. I think you want to talk about a diverse background. Let me tell you about Trey Brown and his background. He's obviously worked in the NFL in a variety of roles. He headed up an AAF franchise as well as that second one's supposed to say XFL franchise. So he's worked under that microscope of being the key decision maker. He's worked as a key front office member as well. The diversity of experience is fantastic. His key role in Cincinnati, from what I could find, is onboarding of veteran pieces. This past cycle was a bit of a mixed bag. But you look at his previous ones, Trey Hendrickson, Von Bell, DJ Reader, these kind of guys that they've brought in and successfully, maximize the contract value of those players is a key thing as well that we haven't really talked a ton about specifically. But you look at the Chargers free agent swings over the past 2 years, they're not really maximizing the value of any of them outside of Khalil Mack and Corey Linsley. So getting somebody in the room who's had that kind of track record, I think would help out tremendously. The Bengals, for whatever it's worth, have a very strong track record of player retention as well. When you're talking about guys like Tyler Boyd, you're talking about, obviously Joe Burrow, Jamar Chase, all these guys get extended, but it's not just guys like that. You're talking about Joe Mixon. You're talking about, I'm totally blanking on his name, Sam Hubbard along the defensive line, Logan Wilson at the linebacker room. They have a really strong track record in that regard. And I think that does help him specifically for the Chargers. And then the other thing is that, the Bengals don't exactly have a premium amount of resources. This is a notoriously small front office room, whereas a lot of teams have, upwards of 15, 20 personnel department employees. The Bengals have like 7 or 8. So Trey Brown has a lot of pressure to be good at his job because there's nobody really else that can do his job. And it's not like he has a ton of help in that regard. So his background is very diverse. The veteran presence and the retention, I think, are directly correlated to his presence. So there are definitely some things to like, but there are some other questionable things I would need more clarity about the Bengals situation as well.
Yeah, I would agree there. The funny thing about the the Bengals personnel department, when I'm trying to look for pictures of these guys, the only couple ones you can find, there's one of him just like sitting in like a corner on a desk with like the one phone. And that's just how I picture the entire like Bengals personnel department. It's just Trey Brown doing everything for them.
Yeah,
I don't think it's actually what it is, but it's just funny that you mentioned that. I think it's great that they've been able to build both a good offense and a good defense over that span. It's not like we're kind of a one-sided approach here. You can say that the defense, sure, the coordinators and coaches, of course, play a big part in that, but being able to provide them with the right players and resources for the offense to be good and the defense to be good is really impressive.
Yeah, I think that offense has been differently approached, defense, different approaches. So it is what it is. All right, Tyler, let's get to these rankings. We're going to do our top 6 overall and then 2 honorable mentions. These were the 10 names that we felt like discussing. We could certainly, spend some time on JoJo Wooden, or there's some other candidates out there, but these were the 10 that we felt like we needed to be discussed most. So, Tyler, who are your 2 honorable mentions? Let's start there.
So I'll start by saying this. I don't have anyone that is not an assistant general manager at minimum in my top 6. Mm-hmm. I think for me, partially in talking with Tej, one of the requirements there was that they had a hand in a lot of other things. And what really sticks out in my mind, as Tej pointed out, yes, you can draft well, of course, but there's so much randomness that goes into the draft, things you can't account for. So you want to also look for candidates that have their hands in things you actually can control and can fix and can change. So if they did not have assistant GM in their title or a history of doing a lot more other things than just working with, let's say, the draft or player personnel, then they are not in my top 6. So my 2 honorable mentions, which is going to be wild for some fans, even though I do like these candidates quite a bit. At number 8, I have Will McClay, and at number 7, I have Joe Hortiz for the Ravens. 2 candidates that I absolutely like, would endorse as candidates for the Chargers. But the discussion we had with Tej did influence my decision to move those guys and focus on those who also have really, really good resumes. They do really draft well and are good in free agency, and also have been the assistant GM, the closest possible thing you can get to, and having the most roles and being successful in them.
Yeah, I actually agree in terms of the honorable mentions. I do think that Will McClay is effectively the draft guru there. But how much of an influence does he really have? I think is a knock. And then Joe Hortiz for me he's 8 for me, and Will McClay is 7. So I have them flip flopped. I think that's what you said.
Yes.
So Joe Hortiz, I think the biggest knock really is I would like to see him really get out of Baltimore, frankly, before I'm like, okay, this is a GM candidate I can really like get behind, because he's just been in a perfect situation. So I agree. Those 2 are my honorable mentions as well.
I honestly did not expect that. That's interesting. I thought I was just going to be flying. Of course, we ended up picking the same things. We'll see how the top 6 shakes out. Yeah. And also part of it was, like I mentioned, McClay did work with the Jaguars in 2001, I believe. Yeah. But some of the guys that were prioritized here were also, they worked with 2 teams, or some people have even worked with 3 teams. And I think that just takes you up another notch. That these guys who have mostly been all Ravens or all Cowboys, they're just not quite great candidates though. Like seriously, I'd be happy with either of these candidates. Absolutely. Just don't make the top 6. Why 6? I don't know.
That's very fair. That's very fair. All right, I'll do my 6 and 5 here. At 6, I'm gonna have Ray Agnew, the assistant GM of the Lions. I think his current assistant GM tag gives a lot of weight, and the background of having 2 very different operating organizations that he's worked under certainly helps his candidacy. It's why he's a top 6 candidate for me. But I think his background is mostly in scouting, and I don't really know how much that role has truly grown in Detroit. From my understanding, Brad Holmes does the bulk of the veteran player acquisitions. So I think his role has not necessarily changed a ton, but I'm definitely interested in him. I would be thrilled with him as a GM candidate. So he's at 6, and then Alec Halaby is at 5 for me. I think I could certainly understand having him higher, but he's been more so in the operational side of things, which is not necessarily a knock. I'm looking for like that true, combination of both if possible. And I just don't know if Halaby's role has really had a ton of influence from a draft standpoint, from a roster standpoint, but I'm definitely interested in him. And he's been the key credit of like the analytically driven background of the Eagles recently is due to Alec Halaby's background. So very interested in him. He's number 5 for me. But that's my 6 and 5. What about you, Tyler?
Well, I hope you guys came to listen for the exact same rankings.
Oh, shoot.
At number 6, I have Ray Agnew for the Lions. At number 5, Alec Halaby for the Eagles. Like you, Halaby is someone that probably could be higher. Frankly, again, like I talked about, you're pulling from the Roseman tree. You're pulling the next in line guy from the Eagles in the Roseman tree who's been there and done that. These candidates are all freaking, I think, pretty good. There's a lot of really good candidates. I like the GM candidates overall more than the head coaching candidates in terms of depth, 100%. How great these candidates are. But yeah, 6 Agnew, 5 Halaby. Interesting.
Yeah, I totally agree that the GM class, if you will, is deep. I think you can make an argument for any of the people that we've talked about, specifically in the top 8 group. So, all right, Tyler, who is 4 and 3 for you then?
All right, number 4 for me is Ed Dawes, the assistant GM for the Colts. And number 3 is my favorite, even though not ranked the highest, Katherine Rush from the Browns. I just think both candidates are fantastic. We're starting to get into that assistant GM, been there with multiple teams, success with multiple teams. I really, really like both of these candidates. Rush, for me, it just feels like a gut feeling for whatever reason. Like as soon as I locked onto the idea, I haven't stopped thinking about it. And you look at what they've done and the problem solving coming from the Roseman disciple, then going to the Browns and doing a lot with nothing and finding ways to keep the Browns in contention. I just think that she's someone, I know it's probably not higher up for most. Like you, I really wasn't on my radar as much, especially because there's another candidate for the Browns that people are considering. But the more I just looked into what she was able to do, has done, I've been watching interviews, like everything just in my heart and in my gut. Like I get it. And I completely endorse her moving forward. And someone today said, "Oh, it's virtue signaling." Believe it or not, guys, women can be good at jobs too. And
Yeah.
sometimes just being really good at your job is enough to get you promoted. She's going to be the next first GM, or excuse me, he's going to be the next. Nope. She's going to be the first female general manager in short time. Could be this year, could be next year, but it's going to be very soon.
Yeah, and there is something to be said about, her, I guess, intention of wanting to be successful, right? Because she's going to be the trailblazing first woman GM. She's going to be she's going to be the one that's really going to want to push things forward. Talk about forward thinking. I think that would be certainly something to check on there. So she is number 4 for me. I think there is a slight concern for me about the track record here. Like I would love to see, I would have loved to see her maybe have like another year in Cleveland to like really get a feel for like what things are here, and parse out like the credit, because like you mentioned, they have a great GM. They have 2 potential GM candidates as assistant GMs. I would love to get like a little bit more information. So she's number 4 for me, but I totally get it. I think she's a super interesting candidate to have. And I think, her background certainly lends itself towards being on this list. The biggest battle for me was 2 and 3. I ended up having Ian Cunningham at 3,
okay,
which pains me as an offensive line guy. I would love to have that. But I just think that his background is really intriguing, but there really hasn't been a true like calling card in Chicago. A lot of these candidates have like, this is what I can hang my hat on in terms of my resume. This is like the thing that I can like be most proud of. The Bears have operated under I think more positive than not recently with Ryan Poles and Ian Cunningham, but I think it just lacks like that true like home run hit. This is like the one thing I can truly like maximize here. So that's why he's 3 for me. It's a little nitpicky, but at the end of the day, when you're getting down to the top 5 GM candidates, like you have to nitpick a little bit. And so
yes.
that's how I broke my tie a little bit here, but was with between Cunningham and who I have at number 2, was just, there was never really like that one thing that I could like really hang my hat on there.
Yeah, completely get it. So Cunningham is going to be second for me. And so I think we'll have the same number 1, I believe.
Yeah.
But yeah, Cunningham is someone who really moved up for me. When I first looked at it, I'll be completely honest. When looking through the names of 30 different candidates, you look at the Bears, why would the Bears guy be such a hot name for a candidate? But then you, like, as you've done and pointed out, and as I've started to dive into it more, the background is just so enticing. Again, learning from Newsom, learning from Roseman. Like if there was one more season with the Bears, maybe we got to see what he could do.
Yeah.
Maybe you'd boost him up a bit higher. But I still, obviously, is my number 2 guy on the list. So I do really, really like him. Number 3 for you. So is number 2 for you Dodds or Peters?
Yeah, number 2 for me is Ed Dodds. I think the personality has really shined through more so than some of these other candidates. You mentioned that quote. I brought up the story of like how he was able to calm Chris Ballard down and like really play the game. And so like we've seen both sides of the coin of his aggressive personality, of his brash personality, as well as his ability to kind of be a calming voice. And I think that aspect of things really goes well for a GM if you're really able to be aggressive in key moments or calm the room in key moments. And you look at like the environment in Indianapolis, like you have one of the most meddling owners in the league, and you have a GM who's been known to kind of be a little bit impulsive in certain situations. And Ed Dodds is kind of the one to kind of rein things back a little bit. And despite those situations, despite the Jeff Saturday thing from Jim Irsay, the Colts still have one of the best draft track records in the league. The emphasis on like athleticism, the emphasis on like forward thinking, I think really pairs well with him. And I know people are going to say like he's who he paired with Jim Harbaugh. That's maybe driving some interest. I totally get it. But I'm interested in Ed Dodds regardless. And I know like we just did the Colts GM thing. But again, I think you have to separate the two. They're very different candidates. They're very different personalities, different backgrounds. So Ed Dodds, I think, is somebody I'm very, very interested in as a Chargers GM.
Yeah, the Colts thing was for Telesco was the Polian disciple thing. I don't believe Dodds has any connection to
No.
Polian whatsoever. I actually couldn't tell you which disciple he would have been from, but no, his background is fantastic, and I think it's so interesting that he is known as being the calming presence in the room. Sometimes I can't imagine what it's like working with Ursay and that family. The fact that he can just fire off cocaine fueled tweets and like that's your boss is really tough. So to just even with all of that to nail the hire, nail your draft, and nail the quarterback pick. I mean, are you kidding me? You got your quarterback, you got your coach, you draft well. Like that is pretty outstanding. And again, like all the candidates, difficult to figure out who to assign credit to, especially when you're the assistant GM. But still, like overseeing that, what they've done since he joined there, I think in 2017 it was like VP of operations, and 2018 assistant GM. But what they've been able to do since he's been there is pretty solid. And in this past year, we're really starting to see all that pay off. So
one other
kudos to
thing
him.
about one other thing about Dodds, I had in my notes, I forgot to mention, this past training camp was such a circus for the Colts. You know, there was the whole Jonathan Taylor thing, and Jim Irsay parked his bus and like interviewed Jonathan Taylor out there. And the person who was speaking to the media to like calm things down was Ed Dodds. It wasn't Shane Steichen. It wasn't Chris Ballard. It wasn't Irsay. It was Ed Dodds. So I think the team has really trusted him with a lot of responsibility. Like he is effectively, you know, the right-hand man of Chris Ballard. So he has a ton of say in Indianapolis. He loves it there, which is why he hasn't left. So there, again, like you mentioned, working environment, certainly less than ideal. And he's maximized his results regardless of, or I guess despite of that situation.
I'm glad you brought that up because I noticed that just, you Google things, you see different things, and it's like, Ed Dodds is out there. Like, send Ed Dodds out there to go calm everybody down. And it's so strange, Yes. Can you remember JoJo Wooden's press conferences? Nope. Has he had one? I have no idea. It's certainly not as frequent as Dodds, and yet you can find plenty on Resch for sure because of very different reasons. And then Dodds, like these two people are just thrust in front of the media, and I think that does. That does mean something because you are going to be scrutinized. You are going to be in front of the media. You are going to be disliked quite a bit sometimes. And for him to have that experience and be the person that goes out there instead of Chris Ballard is pretty fascinating.
Yeah, 100%. All right, so Adam Peters, I think, is objectively our number one. So what do you like most about Mr. Adam Peters, Tyler?
It's the multi-team background with the Patriots, with the Broncos, with the 49ers. And it's the fact that they have just been a consistent problem-solving, I don't want to say great because it's not like they've won Super Bowls, not like that kind of great. But I don't really think it's been a front office issue as much, especially with him recently. What they've been able to do to continue to find guys on day 3, to pull all pros from round 3, round 4, round 5. Like, the Chargers have found some guys on day 2 and day 3, but they rarely are the best player at their position. And the 49ers boast several of them. Yeah. It's not just the easy first round guys. The fact that they've been able to go back to the well and find these guys to acquire different players, to acquire a Trent Williams, etc. Like these things all add up. I think he just has the longest resume, the cleanest resume, the 3-team resume, different roles resume, and he might not be available. Harbaugh might not be available. Adam Peters might not be available, but that's because people really want to pay them a lot of money and retain them. And so that is partially why that he's number one. Just a very, very good resume overall.
Yeah, he even grew up in the Bay Area, so I'm sure it's going to take a lot to pry Adam Peters away. Maybe Justin Herbert and a lot of money is enough to do that. We'll see. But in terms of like problem solving, I think that's kind of the key thing here. And we can really see like the influence there because John Lynch is the GM, but he's like his background is not in personnel decisions. It's not in roster evaluations. Obviously, he has a very large role there. But Adam Peters has had the chance to build around an expensive quarterback in Jimmy G, to draft a quarterback and trade up for a quarterback and work with like limited resources with Trey Lance, figure out how to bounce back from that failure, which I think is like you could count it as a knock against Adam Peters, but hey man, like when you still have the best roster in football, like nobody really cares that you spent 3 first-round picks on Trey Lance. And just the ability to problem solve is so outstanding. You know, the ability to recognize, you know, the needs of your team. I mean, they just signed Sebastian Joseph Day. They obviously onboarded Chase Young, Randy Gregory this year. Like they lost so many key pieces from that defensive line, and they've onboarded Javon Hargrave as well in the offseason. The ability to identify and solve problems is like arguably the biggest, most important responsibility of a GM. And I think Adam Peters' resume in that regard stands out more than anybody else. It's why he's the objective number one candidate. It's why the 49ers are working so hard to keep him. It's why everybody wants to interview him. You know, he could have left last year and taken the Arizona job and he turned it down. He could have left the previous year and taken the Giants job. He turned it down. So it's going to take a lot to pry him away. And I hope the Chargers are ready to throw the book at him, because to me, he's objectively the number one candidate.
Throughout this whole process, it really is starting to feel like the number one thing that we're looking for, considering what we've seen from the Chargers over the last decade plus, is problem solving. And so many things can go right. So, you know, some players can work out, some things can work out. What do you do when things go wrong? How do you solve those problems, or how prepared are you for those problems? How proactive are you rather than reactive? And it feels like for so many years, Tom Telesco, it was, okay, I've got a good group in front of us, and I would agree going into the season, the group seemed good. Then shit hits the fan. And the Chargers are just like, well, okay, next season, we're going to turtle and go on our backs, unfortunately. So you're looking for these individuals who have shown a history of problem solving. I think that's why Adam Peters is number one. That's why a lot of these candidates are in our top 6, because they've shown, as close as we can possibly get to without them being the GM, their ability to problem solve over the course of one season, multiple seasons, offense, defense, drafts, free agency, you name it.
Yeah, I think, you know, the Tom Telesco, I think, understood like when he made a mistake, but the response was like he literally apologized to the team for signing JC Jackson. Adam Peters, you know, the mistake of trading for Trey Lance, they're like, okay, this didn't work out. Let's draft a quarterback. Let's go trade for Christian McCaffrey. Let's trade for Trent Williams. Like, let's make sure whoever is our quarterback has the best resources possible around him. Trading DeForest Buckner, probably a bit of a mistake. Let's go sign Javon Hargrave instead. You know, like that's the kind of stuff that we're talking about here in that regard. Like, I think it's just unmatched for me, the amount of resources. And again, that certainly could come from John Lynch. That could come from the owner, like whatever the case may be. But Adam Peters and his ability to consistently be proactive, solve problems, I think is why he's the number one guy. And I think it's going to be really interesting to see how much it takes to potentially pry him away from San Francisco.
Yeah, could be an expensive off season for sure. You can't spend money on the cap. Well, you can spend some money on coaches and GMs.
Yeah, 100%. All right. Well, we had some good comments today in the chat. We appreciate you guys for tuning in. Tyler, any final thoughts before we head out?
I can't believe that still took 64 minutes, dude. Like, we tried to speed run through that thing and it still took an hour and 4 minutes. So I appreciate you guys listening to this. We obviously put a ton of work into this, whether you agree or disagree or somewhere in the middle. Totally get it. But I appreciate you guys, you just being here, and hopefully you can appreciate some of the work that we've been doing. Hopefully it pays off. Hopefully the Chargers interview some of these people, hire one of them, because I'd love to have something here for you guys. Like, hey, hey, I remember them talking about that candidate. Oh yeah, I'll go back to that video. So I appreciate you guys being here and listening. If you could leave a like and a comment, subscribe if you haven't. We're on the road to 10,000. Subscribe to the Chargers channel if you haven't. I'd love for them to hit 300,000 subscribers. I'd love for us to hit 300,000 subscribers, but that'll be before I'm dead or after I'm dead. So someone will have to carry it on. Our kids will do the podcast. Yeah.
Stephen Jr. and Tyler Jr. will be coming to you live on the Guilty as Charged podcast in 2054 or whatever.
Yes. Well, 31 years. I don't know. We'll see. Anyway, good talk, good discussion for sure.
Yeah, obviously today's kind of GM day. So we had the GM discussion on the Chargers channel and obviously on this channel today. So make sure bookmark these videos. Like Tyler said, I think you feel great about this list of candidates. I think at minimum, you have 6 very highly qualified individuals that the Chargers could pull from, potentially more depending on how you feel about the other ones. So hopefully this is a good GM spot for the Chargers. I think it should be. So, bookmark this video, come back to it later, and we appreciate the support. All right, guys, that's going to do it for us today. We'll be live on Saturday for our usual show that day. Yeah, that'll do it for us. We'll see you next time. As always, Bolt up.